Staff presentation on item 10.
I think it's about a half hour. No more than that.
Pardon?
Is that
Like you to be done by 2:10.
all right? Let's get started in that case.
Okay, we got board members here. We're back in session. This is the time and place for a hearing to receive oral comments and to consider a resolution approving the triennial review work plan for the water quality control plans for the Sacramento, San Joaquin River, and Tulare Lake basins. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and the meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, testimony should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, I do. Thank you. Following the staff presentation, interested persons may speak for 3 minutes each. A timer will be used. Please state your name, address, and affiliation before speaking. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
No.
Thank you. We'll now begin with the staff presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman Longley and board members. My name is Walt Plachta. I'm an engineering geologist in your basin planner in Fresno office. Today we're conducting a hearing for the triennial review of both region basin plans, provide a brief overview of the triennial review process, and give you a summary of work to date. I'll then present a proposed work plan containing a ranking of projects using the prioritization criteria first presented to you during the October workshop and modified based on your input and on the comments received from stakeholders. The work plan will be our guide for planning work for the next 3 years. The goal for today is to obtain input from you and from the public on the proposed work plan and have it approved by board resolution. First, I'll provide a very brief overview of what the basin plans are, what the triennial review is, and where we are now, and what the next steps are to be taken. As you know, the basin plans are foundational documents for our regulatory programs. The preparation and adoption of water quality control plans or basin plans is required by the California Code Section 13240 and supported by the Federal Clean Water Act. Basin plans designate beneficial uses for both surface and groundwater, establish water quality objectives to protect beneficial uses, establish implementation plans that describe the actions necessary to achieve the water quality objectives, and describe surveillance and monitoring activities to determine regulatory compliance. The Central Valley region has 2 basin plans, one for the Sacramento River and San Joaquin River basins, and one for the Tulare Lake Basin. State law requires periodic review of the basin plans. Federal law is clear, requiring a review every 3 years. This is a public process to solicit comments from water quality issues in the Central Valley that may need to be addressed through basin plan amendments. The work plan prepared for the basin plans describes the actions the regional board may take over the next 3 years to investigate and respond to the issues. The priority list of potential issues that may result in basin plan amendments is then developed, and that priority list again is used to direct basin planning efforts over the next 3 years. Our last triennial review was completed in 2014. Since then, the board has considered and adopted several amendments to the 2 basin plans. Some of these have been fully adopted and approved and are now in effect, and there's a list of those. While others have been adopted by you and are in various stages of approval by the State Board, the Office of Administrative Law, and or the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and this is a list of those. Before we discuss the prioritization process for projects, it's worth a look at what the core ongoing projects the planning staff is currently working on. Many of the projects are statewide priorities, and they take a varying degree of ongoing resources. We don't necessarily lead these projects, but we do provide support for them. And others are Central Valley region projects that we do lead and do the bulk of the work required. Here's a partial list of those initiatives. There are also several adopted control programs that are basin plan commitments. As they have been adopted into the basin plans, we are legally committed to completing them. These control programs are often complex and are phased with specific activities such as reviews, re-evaluations, and development of additional implementation criteria with scheduled no later than dates. These complex issues require a phased approach to complete, and they require resources over many years to implement. Our current triennial review began in 2017 when a solicitation was sent out to almost almost 4,000 interested parties. The call was for those parties to attend public workshops and provide oral and/or written comments on basin plan elements that they felt may need amending. 2 public workshops were conducted in August 2017 to allow parties from across the region the opportunity to provide verbal comments. 1 workshop was held here in Rancho Cordova, which also had a video conference link to the board's Reading office, and 1 was done in the board's Fresno office. From that solicitation and workshop, we received 21 comment letters. In addition, 3 comments were received during the process of adopting the salt and nitrate control plan, and 6 comments from the 2014 integrated report process were referred to planning staff for consideration during the triennial review. The commenting parties included individuals, Native American tribes, water agencies, advocacy groups, as well as state and federal agencies. In all, a total of 95 individual comments were received. These comments were used to develop a list of projects that would be ranked within the work plan. 27 projects that had been identified that would help address the broad issues. Full descriptions of the 27 projects are included in your board packets. These projects are in addition to the ongoing work of the planning staff. Again, you have a copy of these, and I'm not going to read them all. There's 27 projects. They're listed in group by issue and not meant to imply any priority. You'll notice that some of the projects are designated as existing and as new. Many issues require completion of multiple projects or phases of projects, each building on the results of the last. Or perhaps there are parallel projects addressing different facets of the same issue. With so many worthy projects and with resource limitations, there was a need to prioritize the proposed projects. A board workshop was held in October to present and discuss a project prioritization method. Prior to the workshop, staff released a draft prioritization strategy for public comment. Written and oral comment were considered when preparing the draft triennial review work plan. 9 written comment letters were received from stakeholders prior to the workshop. In addition, as part of the workshop, several stakeholders made oral comments on the proposed prioritization method. Based on the comments received from the board and the stakeholders, staff prepared a draft work plan to list and prioritize the projects. First, we set aside the projects where the board has already made an enforceable regulatory commitment. This included projects where the board is committed to reassessing an existing program, which is the case for some of the pesticide programs. This also includes phase projects such as the Delta methylmercury TMDL, and where the basin plan requires the board to periodically reassess and revise the program as necessary. We also set aside a project that the board had previously identified as high priority, the Salt and Nitrate Management Plan, or CV SALT initiative. Finally, the remaining projects were prioritized using the prioritization criteria as first recommended by staff and modified on input during the workshop. And these projects were scored. The more criteria that applied, the higher the ranking. These are the criteria developed with board management and considering input from the board and from the stakeholders. The criteria we used are listed on that slide. And these are the same ones I think you saw at the workshop. The last 2 criteria addressing the 303D listed water quality impairment and supporting the board's efforts on climate change were added based on comments received on the prioritization process. All the criteria are discussed in more detail in the staff report that is in your packet. Staff did not list the projects from 127. Instead, we grouped the projects into categories or ranks. Rank 1 is for projects that the board has made a legally enforceable regulatory commitment to completing. Rank 2 is for special projects where that the board, within its discretion, has determined to be a high priority. And we did not rank or score the rank 1 or rank 2 projects. Then we took all the other projects, applied the prioritization factors, and placed them in ranks 3 through 5 based solely on the project scoring. The more factors that applied, the higher the ranking. This is the list of rank 1 projects. Again, these are projects that the board has made a legally enforceable regulatory commitment to completing. The proposed salt nutrient control program, or CV salts, was placed into rank 2. However, of course, the projects included in rank 2 are at the board's discretion. The next 2 slides list the rank 3 projects. These contain those projects that met 3 or more of the prioritization criteria. Again, I know we're going through these pretty quickly, but if you have any questions, we can answer them now or at the end of the presentation at your preference. There's the second page of rank 3 projects. Rank 4 projects meet two of the prioritization criteria. And these are the rank 4 projects. And rank 5 projects meet 1 of the prioritization criteria. Several stakeholder comments were received on the draft work plan. Board also participated in a teleconference with representatives of several California Native American tribes to discuss the results of the triennial review and to hear their input on the process and on the proposed projects. The written comments came from these individuals and are actually organizations that are on the slide. In general, the comments were supportive of the triennial review and work plan. There was actual individual support for Project 9, the appropriate beneficial use designation in agriculturally dominated water bodies and agricultural conveyance facilities. Project 11, which is the temperature criteria and objectives project. And Project 27, the development of procedures to define and determine naturally occurring background conditions. All of these projects were placed in rank 3. Solano County had these comments suggesting that that monitoring and reporting requirements for discharges be streamlined, and the board is obviously committed to reducing redundancies within our regulatory programs. The triennial review process in itself does not reopen previous basin plan amendments or permits adopted by the board. However, the board commits to reducing redundant requirements through our basin plan amendment process for new amendments as they are developed. In addition, we are committed to implementing the State Water Board's cost of compliance resolution through our regulatory programs and permits. Solano County also had commented on the various electronic platforms and that maybe they should be consolidated in a single open public platform to report and download information. And our response was that the state and regional boards are coordinating with DWR, California Water Quality Monitoring Council, California Fish and Wildlife on a new water data management system under the Open and Transparent Water Act to create, operate, and maintain a statewide integrated water data platform, and to develop protocols for data sharing, documentation, quality control, et cetera. And the Central Valley obviously is currently participating in this process. The Elam Indian Colony recommends that the basin plan include the tribal tradition and cultural, the CUL, and tribal subsistence fishing, the T-sub, tribal beneficial uses, and they be applied across the region and to Clear Lake and its tributaries. And our response was that the tribal beneficial uses was placed in rank 3, the highest possible ranking for scored projects, and the project would involve water bodies region-wide, including Clear Lake and its tributaries. Elam Colony also recommends that $510,000 in Phase 1 of Clear Lake Nutrient Control Program, Project 26, should be reallocated to have responsible parties start monitoring their respective areas for TMDL data, and they are then held accountable for this provision. And Central Valley Water Board agrees that responsible parties associated with Clear Lake Nutrient Control Program must be held accountable to the requirements of the TMDL. The board is currently working with responsible parties to obtain information related to their assigned load allocations and to identify appropriate next steps regarding the TMDL. The funding associated with the Phase 1 environmental drivers of cyanobacteria blooms and cyanotoxins in the Clear Lake project has already been allocated through the discretionary contract process and cannot be redirected at this time. However, the board commits to working with stakeholders and responsible parties on monitoring and funding needs. They also commented on Project 8, the individual beneficial use evaluation for groundwater beneath the Sulphur Bank mine in Lake County. They indicated that the de-designation of groundwater beneath the mine as being proposed in the US EPA strategy for site cleanup would encroach on the tribe's reserved right to groundwater. The tribe states that they fully intend to use that groundwater in the future for municipal purposes as new technologies for water treatment are developed. Our answer was that the board's designation of beneficial uses indicates the board's goal for water quality protection and does not relate to water rights or the availability of water for any particular purpose. Regarding de-designation, the board considers the factors listed in the state are the sources of drinking water policy for de-designation or designation of municipal and domestic supply, MUN beneficial use. The Water Code Section 13240 specifies that the water board adopt water quality plans that include beneficial use for water quality protection for surface and groundwater in Central Valley. The board's designation of beneficial uses for the water quality is not expected to affect any federally reserved designations. As currently proposed, Project 8 is ranked among the lowest of the priority of the project proposals. If this prioritization remains unchanged by the board will not devote resources to de-designating the MUN beneficial use of groundwater in Lake County in the next 3 years. That concludes the summary of the comments received and their corresponding responses. No changes were made to the work plan based on the comments received. Okay, availability of resources, of course, is critical to prioritization project process. I think we talked about this in October. Our resources are leveraged between waste discharge permit fees and US EPA funding for approximately 21 person years or PYs. Combined resources are utilized to implement the triennial review work plan, which for 2018-2019 includes activities specifically related to basin planning, the TMDL program, the CV salts program, and Delta activities. Whoop, got ahead of myself there. Okay. Again, much of this staff time is allotted 21 person years, or person years for the next year. Approximately 89% of the resources are already allocated to existing projects and the core support functions. And that would leave approximately 11% of the available resources that could be directed to new projects. This is just a visual representation of the last slide showing that approximately 11% of current resources are available for new projects. And this just shows where our resources are split between CV salts, the Delta, the TMDL, and basin planning. Following board adoption of the 2018 triennial review work plan, staff will prioritize basin planning resources as part of the annual portfolio management work planning process to implement projects identified in ranks 1 through 3. As projects are completed, staff will begin on other ranked projects as resources allowed. Under the portfolio management process, proposed program priorities are discussed with the board, actually scheduled for later this meeting. During this meeting, the board has input on the annual priorities, which are used to craft the following year's annual work plan. The annual work plan includes resource allocation, priority projects, milestones, performance measures. By this process, the board will have input into which of the high priority basin planning projects are implemented each year. Again, and also there's an annual update to the board, typically scheduled in August. During the annual update, the board receives information on each program to include fact sheets describing progress on work plan priority projects. Once this presentation is complete, we welcome the board's comments and questions regarding the proposed work plan. Public will then have an opportunity to provide their comment on the proposed work plan. Necessary changes will be made to the draft work plan based on your input and the stakeholder comments. And then staff would recommend that the board adopt this work plan by resolution. So thank you. That concludes my presentation.
I have to thank you very much for moving through that quite rapidly.
I need to take a breath.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? Okay. Thank you. We're ready now for comments by interested persons. And before, if I may remind you before you testify, please state whether or not you've taken the oath and identify yourself. Bob Gore?
Taken the oath, or oath, if you wanted to make it a verb. First, on behalf of the California Independent Petroleum Association, we were engaged forcibly by staff, and we appreciate that consideration and all of the process. Planning ahead may be a novel concept for state agencies, but it certainly is appreciated. We have 330 or more medium and small employers, along with our diverse and skilled workforce who live and work in the San Joaquin Valley. And we're committed to working with the board in preserving high-quality drinking water. We'd like to, again, thank the board staff and say that we support flexible regional solutions. We also regard the specific prioritized work item, municipal de-designation, as a foundational issue that may lead to others. And we acknowledge that within the CV SALTS process, we are a member, that there may be indications from the state board that municipal de-designation may be altered in some way as a lead issue, and we're prepared to work with that. Also, from another perspective, from additional clients, the City of Fresno, the California Association of Wine Grape Growers, Modesto Irrigation District, Kings River and Kern County Water Authority, it may be useful in the next triennial plan, as you begin it, to consider doing away with the triennial plan. It is a static vehicle in a time when high flexibility is necessary and water issues are predominating the public policy agenda and evolve very quickly. And the Central Valley, as you know better than most, is kind of the test bed for dealing with many of these issues. And a triennial plan may or may not be adequate in the future, just overall.
You know, Bob, I'm not disputing what you're saying, but if I'm not mistaken, triennial review is part of the Clean Water Act.
Yeah, Clean Water Act requirement. So
And that really ties our hands. The better person to talk to on making that change would be the federal legislators.
I will say, I think that the our commitment, to be quite frank, is to implement the work plan, number one. But number two, at the end of 3 years, come back and tell the board, and I don't think this has been done quite explicitly in the past, about what worked and what didn't work. And I think if you look at triennial reviews in years past, they are a set requirement of the Clean Water Act. Got to do this every 3 years. Got to run through this exercise. Many times, you know, I know during the drought years, well, yeah, we had the triennial review, and then we didn't do anything on the triennial review because the drought took over. And so I think we do want to provide that accounting of where our prioritization shifted. I think we do get, you know, but we do run through this exercise. We take it very seriously in how we direct resources. But, you know, we do recognize that there are exigent overriding circumstances that frequently occur in California water. So that's kind of the big asterisk that is next to the triennial review perennially.
Well, maybe there's a way to do some plugins or more advanced planning that can change. Agile is the word I'm hunting for. So.
Might be an annual review. Since it is directing resources, that would make some sense.
That's the next annual report that I'm about to give. That's what that is. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah Ryan.
I don't have much of a voice. I actually did not take the oath, so I guess I have to be sworn up here. I did not take the oath when I was back there because I
Okay,
wasn't sure how that worked. So
And also, would you like some water?
No, I'm okay.
Okay,
If you
okay.
could stand hearing, listening to me, I'm sorry. It's better than it was yesterday.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Is the testimony you're about to give the truth? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Thank you very much. And then go ahead and identify, well, you already identified yourself, so go ahead with your testimony, please.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Ryan. I'm the environmental director for the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians. I'm here today on behalf of the tribe to ask the board to prioritize the tribal beneficial uses project and have it be one of the funded and worked on projects for this coming triennial review, this existing triennial review. The tribes of California have been working on this process of having the tribal beneficial uses adopted at the State Water Resources Control Board, and now we've moved into working at it at the regional level as recommended by the State Water Resources Control Board. We've been working on this for at least 6 years. What we've identified over the years is that without this foundational understanding of tribal uses in the water bodies of California, there is unsurety of whether tribal uses are actually safe to conduct, and this is leading to a reduction in the uses. So because the exposures of tribes as they are doing ceremonies, as they're doing traditional practices in the waters of California, there have not been enough understanding and testing of what that really means in terms of safety for them. And it's, as I said, it's foundational. Without that, you can adopt all these other projects and work on all these other projects, but is it going to be safe for tribes to use it? And as the Clean Water Act supports, this says that water bodies need to be fishable and swimmable. That swimmable portion, tribal uses is another human use, similar to swimmable, but not swimmable, that really should be at the basis of the understanding of any water management policy in the state of California. I do know, because of my own work that I do with the tribes in the state of California, as chair of the Cal EPA Tribal Advisory Committee, as the work group lead for the California Issues Work Group for US EPA Region 9, that there are many tribes who are interested in this occurring, and that all of us want to move forward with it right away, so that we can partner with the state and with our individual regions to make this work. So we hope that you understand that there is funding that the tribes use. They already have water monitoring programs. They've already done some foundational work of their own to identify what their exposures are like, that we can work and partner with the Central Valley staff and get this done.
Any questions or comments by board members?
I will say, as the prioritization stands, the tribal beneficial uses are in the highest ranked category. And unless the board opts to alter that, we will be committing resources to try and get that work done within the next 3 years.
Okay. We
Thank
look
you.
forward to it if that
Tonight-
gets supported.
I also have a card from Frank Del Valle,
Deval.
excuse me, of the Pomo Indian tribe. But you wish to come forward, sir, and testify?
Thank you.
And possibly we will talk to you again, Sarah, since this is the same topic, same tribe.
Hi, my name is Frank Del Val. I come from the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians, and they're in Lake County. We used to call Clear Lake.
Have you taken the oath, sir?
Huh?
Have you taken the oath?
Oh, excuse me, no, sir, I am not.
Please raise your right hand. Is the testimony you're about to give the truth? If so, answer I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Again, I come from Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians. They're in Lake County. I'd like to recognize it as it used to be called Clear Lake. As a child growing up, we used to hold ceremonies, and we'd go down and bathe ourselves inside the water of life to remind us that where we come from, because we're all born inside of water, and we appreciate that. We love the water of life, and we pray for it every day that we go down to this lake. But you know, like I said, when I was a kid growing up, we'd swim down there at the lake and go in the water and watch these fish, you know, swim around. So beautiful back in there in the days, you know. But today it is so ugly, so ugly. We don't even really recognize it and go near it. It's just so horrifying, ugly that, you know, that thinking that how you grew up and you were born inside of water and how you could be so afraid of it, you know, because of the contamination inside of the water. It is just horrifying, you know, not only for me but for my children and my children's children, you know. And you know, I'd like to ask, you know, please help us, you know, because this lake is so horrifying, so ugly. That, you know, and we do our best as tribal, come together with this algae that they got growing inside this lake, and this hydrilla. We don't know where it came from. It's non-native to us, and so it kind of scares us tribal members. But you know, again, I'd like to say, you know, please help us, Oh,
If I understood the executive officer correctly, the project for Clear Lake is ranked very high, and is one of the projects that we're giving great attention to. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
we've heard you, and we're acting accordingly.
okay. Thank you all.
Thank you
you.
very much. Is there any other questions from board members? Thank you. I have a card from Melissa Thorne.
Good afternoon, board members. Melissa Thorne here for Valley Water Management Company, and I wanted to support project number 4, which is the MUN dedesignation for oil-produced zones. And I wanted just to encourage you to have it be not just the oil production zones, but any areas that are not meeting the MUN criteria and the sources of drinking water policy. And I've talked to you about this in the past, and we support that as being one of the ways that we may be able to implement CV salts, where you have areas of the valley that are naturally salty, and we might be able to use those as salt sinks. That's what we did for the Tulare Lake Basin. There may be other places on the west side of Kern County that would make sense for that as well, and we encourage you to keep that as a high priority item. Thank you.
Before you leave, Melissa, Patrick, any comments on Melissa's comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we concur. We ranked the oil in the production zones was one of the projects that was solicited during the solicitation process. So that came in. It's very highly ranked. In terms of the beneficial use redesignation in non-production zoned area, that is entirely encompassed within CV salts, and we will be considering that moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Melissa, because I learned you're going to New Zealand, safe travels. At this point, is there anyone else who's not submitted a card who wishes to testify? Seeing none, then we're ready for a closing statement by staff.
Recommendation is to adopt the triennial review as proposed.
I take it, since that comes from the executive officer, that is the executive officer's final recommendation. I'll close the hearing then. At this point, it's time for the board to deliberate, and I'm ready for a motion.
Well, I just wanted to comment on some of the interrelationship between what we do. And today I talked, and Jennifer LeVay talked about the Clear Lake Blue Ribbon Commission, and there are tribal members on that, and the goal of that is addressing water quality in Clear Lake. And as I mentioned, that's I think can be a broader have a broader range of work, including forest health in the region, and fuel reduction, which affect Clear Lake because the fires have. And I think jobs in the region, and jobs in the woods, and working on water quality at Clear Lake are important in that effort also. So I think our commitment to that commission is part of implementing this tribal work. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Do I have a motion? Since you have your mic on.
Yes, I'll move I'll move the proposal.
Mr. Snyder has moved and Ms. Gadara has seconded. Roll call, please.
Mr. Schneider? Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Kadara? Dr. Longley?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
If I could, I really want to express thanks to Walt and especially Jennifer for stepping up. She's not actually the basin planning program manager. When we were hiring Jeannie's replacement, I don't know if Adam volunteered you or not, but it wound up, she took this on. We actually recreated this process. This process is very different than you've heard before. It included a different type of ranking system. It included a more transparent process for figuring out how the board would rank these projects, and a more frank discussion of resources. And Jen and Walt and a couple other folks who are part of this project rose to the occasion, even though it wasn't actually their job to do. They stepped into the breach and delivered this package to you today. And I just want to make sure that the board acknowledges that work, because it's above and beyond.
And I want to thank you for stepping up and moving more rapidly than I would normally expect through the presentation. I had some folks that had to testify by 2:30 and they're leaving. So I wanted to get them up in front of us before they're calling on them and find out they were gone. Debbie, should I have called upon you? No, or you just like to hang out with us? Okay. At this point, we're ready for agenda item 9. This time we will discuss and approve the calendar for meeting next year.
It's item 11.
Number 11. It's item 11, excuse me. What did I say? 9, 9, 11. Okay.
So we have the calendar as proposed, and it was subject to some discussion back in October. The meeting date of February 7th is already set. The remaining dates, if you see this in your tab, April 4-5, that's the one down in Fresno, June 6-7, August 1-2, October 10th and 11th, and that's also that's in Reading, and then December 5-6 are the proposed dates. And unless we hear any objections, we can ratify and move forward.
We're not going to take a motion on this. All I need is, are there any objections to those dates?
No, those are fine for me.
It's fine. And Bob must think they're fine because he left. So, by absence, people are agreeing to them. Very good. So we're done with item 11. And we'd noticed that we might take up item 16 today. And unless there's objection, I'd like to move on to agenda item 16.
Yes, and I can do that. Hang on 1 second, we'll get the presentation up. Just give me 1 minute.
Yeah, just looking at what we have tomorrow. I want to get out of here tomorrow. Hopefully we can get it done in the morning.
So this is part of the executive officer's report, is a discussion of the water quality program priorities for fiscal year 2019-2020. Before we move to that, as part of item 16, Clint Snyder, which is also part of the executive officer report, was going to talk a little bit about the work that's being done in response to the CAR and the campfires, just as a very, very broad overview for the board. Just a couple minutes, so with your indulgence.
Good afternoon, Dr. Longley and members of the board. Just give you a brief update on sort of the latest activities of the CAR fire and some of the work we've been doing with the campfire in Paradise. As you heard in October, there was quite a bit of effort sort of teeing up our response action to the CAR fire. Not to reiterate any of that, but in the end, we identified 1,640 acres that we felt were suitable for erosion control treatment and would have the maximum benefit to fisheries, drinking water supplies, and residents of the CAR fire area. Really what that means is we've identified 5 tributaries to the Sacramento River between Highway 44 Bridge and Keswick that we'll be treating. As part of that effort, the State Water Board assisted us in obtaining about $8.6 million in federal funds, FEMA, under the Hazard Mitigation Grant process. And so Joe Karkowski, Assistant Deputy Director of Finance, who you met earlier, was instrumental, him and his team, in that effort. Lisa Labrado, another staff person there, works for Joe. Worked for about 90 days to get that done. In the end, Eileen Sobek, Executive Director, State Water Board, stepped in, and as well as Gordon Burns with Cal EPA, really to get some Section 7 consultation waivers to FEMA to facilitate the final pieces of that grant. Nonetheless, it all happened. It all came together. That money is now available to the water boards. So the way that works is we contracted that money to the Western Shasta RCD. They've since contracted with the California Conservation Corps. They'll be working with CAL FIRE and others to implement those erosion control treatments over that 1,640 acres. So as part of that, the RCD has set up a staging area on Sierra Pacific Industries ground in downtown Redding, kind of in the heart of that burn area. A lot of contractors are pulling materials off of that. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. Brian Smith, a supervising engineer in my office, is sort of the lead on the CAR fire effort at this point in time, working with a couple of other staff in my office to manage that grant. So work is now underway. California Conservation Corps is out there. Brian Smith, Lynn Coster, and Brandon Diaz of my staff flew the CAR fire on Tuesday. So far, we've been pretty lucky. Even though we had some pretty good rains last week, things seem to be holding up fairly well. I think for the large part, that's because we haven't reached that saturation potential yet. So we're going about as fast as we can. The RCD is going about as fast as they can, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that we get the bulk of that work done before later spring rains hit. In addition to that, both Patrick and Eileen Sobek have requested, and this is part of the proposal, we'll be performing a water quality assessment and an effectiveness assessment program as part of that work. So we've been working with CAL FIRE, particularly Drew Coe, who's a former employee of ours, has recommended some microplots that they use in Europe. So we'll be using a combination of water quality monitoring, photo point monitoring, and the use of these plots, to estimate what the sediment savings is as a result of these erosion control measures. What we're really trying to do is learn from this experience. Is the $8.5 million and the work that's associated with that, is that an effective use of resource? And really, what was the net benefit to the environment as a result of that labor? So we're hoping to learn from that. All of those things are in motion, and we can provide another report maybe in a couple of months in February. Happy to answer any questions on the CAR fire before we move on to the campfire.
Well, you gave us a interesting tour of the car fire. One of the points that came out during the car fire, and we were down there on Keswick, and somebody, it may have been you or somebody else, was pointing up to the side of the mountain and saying that burned about 8 years ago. And so what we're seeing now are burns occurring apparently quite periodically soon after each other. Is that correct?
Yeah, and honestly, it's the same thing that happened with the campfire. We had a series of, they call it the lightning strike fires in 2008 that burned some of the same area as the campfire. And of course, this year we have a reoccurrence over some of that same burned area. But yes,
And that burn area had grown enough that it was highly flammable.
yep, absolutely. It's unfortunate, but a lot of times when we have wildfire like we've seen, the first things that come back are the grasses, forbs, and brush. And particularly in the Redding area, the soils and the climate are really susceptible to manzanita and buckbrush, real thick vegetation that's hard to fight fire in.
Mm-hmm.
What's important about that is fires in shrubland are a completely different animal than fires in forests. And
Yes.
how we think about those and differentiate between them is critically important if we're going to have sound strategies. And it wouldn't matter in that location, I don't think, with the winds that there were and the aridity that there was in that area before that fire started.
Right.
Or in the campfire too. In fact, all these fires are just, with the drought, with even we had a fairly wet winter, and then it was real dry again, and everything re-dried out, and it's just a product of the new normal in some ways, I think.
Unfortunately,
And
I think it is.
we will get now a change in the vegetation because these fires are in the increased aridity is changing what's going to grow back in these places. So
Yeah,
it's
really
it's
fortunate.
a changing time.
Particularly in the car fire, the McConnell Foundation, which is a philanthropic organization in the Redding area, they're proposing a very extensive replanting effort throughout the Redding area. They've been also working with FEMA and Shasta County. I think the current proposal is somewhere around $30 million to move into or apply towards a replanting effort. So
Yeah, and the question then is, what are we going to replant there? I mean, the forests that were there before in the forested area are not the kind of forests that are going to grow again,
right.
and they may be a lot more hardwoods in that area than softwoods. So I think, people, we and the board too, and I know Angela's working on this, need to really be thinking about when we replant or others do, we want to be sure we're planting the forests of the future and not necessarily what was there before.
That's a good point. Any other questions on the car fire?
Go ahead.
So quickly with the campfire, we're taking a slightly different approach to the campfire response than we do with the car fire response, primarily because of the number of personnel they have on scene. Currently, they have about 10 or 11 California Conservation Corps crews, 15 persons each, plus CAL FIRE crews, a number of watershed groups working on erosion control. Thus far, they've applied about 70,000 linear feet of straw wattle, straw socks, other erosion control materials. So sort of that in combination with the low burn severity that sort of presented itself as a result of the campfire. We're already seeing quite a bit of vegetation returning in the form of grasses, and then a lot of the canopy still remains. As strange as that sounds, this is really a structure fire sort of a scenario. So all of that said, Justin Lanier of my staff participated in the watershed emergency response team. So we've had an opportunity to get sort of a first hand glance at the issues, soil burn severity, worked with USGS and CAL FIRE and some of the debris flow modeling and what have you. All things considered, we're not expecting large pockets of debris flows, although flows are going to be very flashy, and we've already seen that with this last storm. So as a result, we're really taking more of a technical assistance posture for the campfire. We've been heavily involved with Cal OES, Butte County OES. We've participated in at least one sort of emergency decision point, trying to figure out how to deal with mass casualty of large animals. So working through that with the various agencies and came up with some plans. So we will be touring, I will be touring along with Angela Wilson, Cal OES, Leslie Loudon, the director of DFA, and James Mon, Assistant Deputy Director of DFA, on Monday. And as part of that, we'll be looking at some of the wastewater treatment issues they have in Paradise. As you know, when we walk through the LAMP process, Paradise has about 11 or 12,000 septic systems that they rely on. They don't have a what you would call a first-class wastewater treatment plant up there. But this does present an option with the amount of funding that's flowing into the town of Paradise. We may have an opportunity here to assist them in developing some sort of a wastewater treatment system. That may be a small package plant in Paradise and then some regionalization, transferring that waste to Chico. But nonetheless, there's an opportunity here, and we want to at least explore those options. So nonetheless, a lot of work still happening with both fires. Staff are doing a great job.
We need a long vision, and what we're seeing is a lot of folks, because of the high cost of housing elsewhere, when they retire, they move into the mountain areas. And it's not just Paradise. If you overfly the Sierra Nevadas in this valley, it's like lice on the back of a dog, an infected dog. It's houses everywhere outside of federal lands. So down the road, I know county planning departments, and you were discussing some of this with me this morning, Patrick, but county planning departments are reluctant to get involved in these kinds of areas. Certainly these fires show the need. And as you point out, I think not just for Paradise, we need to be on the lookout for these kinds of, not just these kinds of opportunities to participate in better planning, getting better waste treatment and water supplies for these communities. At the same time, we don't want to make them unaffordable, but it's a conundrum that's hard to crack. But this is an opportunity, and emergency funds may make it happen. As was pointed out to me this morning by Patrick, access to these areas is something that has to be improved also. Anyway.
A lot of delicate balances to be struck in these areas.
Yep.
So thanks to Clint.
Sorry, Patrick, I do have one quick
Oh,
follow-up
absolutely.
question, I guess, of Clint is, I think you mentioned 1,100 septic systems, and I'm just,
11 to 12,000.
11 to 12,000, sorry. So that's a significant number with serving a lot of people, and I am a little, I'm just wondering about whether those meet current septic standards in terms of distance, and I don't know where their water comes from, if that's wells or a water system, or, I mean, is there larger, I mean, you talked about potential options, and I'm looking now, are there constraints that we didn't have before that maybe we are going to drive this in some different direction?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to Paradise, it's like a lot of small towns, a lot of those ones that Carl was just referring to, they grow very slowly over a long period of time without any, real foresight and planning, at the onset. Paradise is similar to that. Underlying geology makes it even more complex. Shallow soils underlain by thick basalt flows. In some areas, there's not a lot of replacement area. Really what we're trying to do is just look at this as an opportunity to remedy that situation that they have up there. There is no easy answer, but there are a lot of domestic wells. They do have the Paradise Irrigation District that supplies water to parts of the community, but not all of it. There's just a lot of complexities, and of course, the return rate of residents, further compounds that. You don't have the revenue that you would need, unfortunately, to sustain a larger either water treatment plant or wastewater treatment plant.
What sort of damage to the fire did the Paradise ID experience? Did they lose flumes and things of that sort?
There was some damage. They're coming back online. They've been back online partially. A lot of their focus is trying to put service back to the commercial area of the town, what's left of it. Real unfortunate situation, but in part, that's what we're going to be looking at on Monday. Both Paradise Irrigation District, kind of get a good sense of the ground, you know, what things look like, the burn debris. And then as part of that, the governor's asked and put together a debris task force. And so they've requested volunteers from a number of agencies. The state and regional water boards will be participating. We've offered volunteers. So all staff will be 40-hour HAZWOPER trained, and then they'll move into the field to help with the cleanup crews in mitigating some of those hazards that are out there. So it's a huge, huge effort. A lot of personnel on the ground.
Thank you.
I would add to that. I think the board member Schneider, one of the cases I worked on right when I joined up with the board is the town of Paradise actually has a special type of permit called an on-site wastewater management zone. Fairly rare in the state because their septic systems are creating such problems, and they have not made very good progress on resolving those problems. I think Clint's exactly right. Reestablishing those septic systems, they're certainly not in compliance with the aughts because they were not in compliance with the prior on-site septic treatment regulations, which were much different than the ones we were in before. So if you can't meet the ones back in the late 90s, you're sure as heck not meeting the ones that are in place right now. I think frankly, I think the only way to kind of meet the requirements is to figure out whether it's a package plant deal or whether you get that sewage to somewhere else, whether it's Chico, to actually effectively manage it. I remember working with, I think it was Ron Dykstra with some of those, and it didn't look good. The board did everything it could to kind of facilitate the effective management, given the resources, the very lack thereof that happened in town of Paradise. So some of these problems have been developing for quite some time.
We have, I think about towns like, I think MacArthur was one, if I have the right name, where, you know, it was a company town, and then there was lots and lots of problems, and through granting and over time, a lot of that was rectified and came into compliance. Or even, you know, we look at the town of Colfax. It was a small town, and I mean, a lot of it is what's the value of rural America, and I think there is value in that. And
Absolutely.
And I guess we should be looking at grant possibilities, or maybe some of that. What was it, $8 million? Oh, that was all for erosion control, I guess. But you know, maybe that, you know, sooner than later we should be looking at that option and see if that's a possibility.
And I know, you know, one of the issues, and I think, you know, Debbie knows it quite well with Civiqua. The challenges with operating systems in that area very often means that the rates are what, you know, city folk would find shocking. It's very, very, very high rates to have an effectively run treatment system when you have miles of collection system through very tough terrain and a small plant that is discharging into very pristine water, so the standards are even tougher. You add that together, and it's very, very difficult to come up with cost-effective solutions. It's one of the reasons why the property values are lower, tend to be lower in those areas, because if you really want to effectively manage the utilities, the utility costs are going to be a lot higher. So that is part of the economic picture that you see in a lot of those foothill communities and a lot of those rural areas in the state. And it's a very delicate balance. We do what we can, but we, you know, the board's mission is a small slice of that. Thanks to Clint. I asked him to come up tomorrow and get it done today, since this is item 16. Now I'm about to launch into the water quality program priorities. You heard a little bit about, during the course of the triennial review, about the Water Board's prioritization process. I'm here today to provide you with the program priorities. These were developed by the program managers and the executive sponsors. The executive sponsors are the assistant executive officers from the various offices for fiscal year 2019-2020. And just bear in mind, this year begins in July that we're talking about. So we're still in 2018-2019 right now. So what we're talking about is what the work plans will look like for the next fiscal year. Some of this presentation is keyed to the portfolio management process, which I discussed in front of you in August. If you're new to this, I'm still relatively new to this, feel free to ask me questions at any point in time during this presentation. Briefly, I'll talk a little bit about the portfolio management calendar, why we're doing it at this point in time in the year, and then I'll go through the individual water quality programs and their priorities as proposed for fiscal year 2019-2020. And just a word or a few words on portfolio management and annual work plans. Portfolio management was a process for developing and working to meet measurable goals in our water quality and administrative programs. We're primarily a fee-funded agency, and I think that means that we owe it to both the public and to the regulated entities to have an efficiently run programs that maximize our productivity and environmental value. Central to the portfolio management approach is an annual work plan, which provides, among other things, a summary of the current status of the program, an assessment of program resources, and a way of distributing those resources between core programs and priority projects. The program manager essentially is responsible for developing the annual work plans, and the annual work plans are at the core of this. They consist of core activities, which is the permit issuance, the evaluation of reports, the evaluations of reports of waste discharge, evaluation of monitoring reports. It's core work that we do on a day-to-day basis, and priority projects. Priority projects are those other than core activities that further program objectives and that require designated program resources. And that would include things like the development of a new general order, an MAA or an MOU, a management agency agreement, or a memorandum of understanding between agencies to change how we have a permitting approach, and expanded stakeholder processes, complex enforcement actions, discretionary contracts, the things that are outside of the regular work that the board staff do. I'm pretty new to this. I think the area that I operated in before was the Office of Chief Counsel. I'd wonder why the program staff needed these things done on a specific timeline and under a specific process. The reason why a lot of those deadlines came to pass was because of this portfolio management process. We've actually incorporated some of the attorneys in the process to make sure that everybody's kind of lining up and pulling in the same direction. This cartoon actually I had placed on my desk here at the Central Valley Water Board. I have a pretty good idea of which was a staffer that put it on my desk. And we work together quite well, but you know, every once in a while I get frustrated with the attorneys. This messy schematic is a simplified view of the portfolio management process. This was discussed in detail in August, and I'd be happy to rebrief any one of you on any aspect of this process if you're interested in it. I can do that offline. It's a fascinating way of which we manage our programs and their workload. For today, what is important to note is that the big blue wheel here, and I think my mouse is dying, but the big blue wheel here is a substantive implementation of the annual work plans. This is the, this is the start of the fiscal year where we do end-of-year assessments and where we do kickoff meetings for the next work year. And the orange color, this prioritization up in the corner here, that's where the board participates in the development of the program priorities. That's in October and December. That's right where we are today. The first step in the establishment of program priorities is basically figuring out what you need to do in the year to come. There are 4 important steps here. 1, in November, the program managers developed their proposed program priorities for the following fiscal year. In December, the board considers the program priorities during the EO report presentation. In January, the program managers work with the executive sponsors on the draft work plans, and then the leadership team, which is the program managers, will meet in late January to discuss priorities and verify program resource allocations and things like that. And that will be incorporated in the annual programmatic work plan. The approved work plan defines the core activities and priority projects to be completed with the allotted resources in a given fiscal year. Now I'm going to go through, talk a little bit about the water quality programs themselves and what their priorities are. I'll note that the administrative unit is absolutely a water quality program. They support the operational and administrative needs of all the offices. They do not have a program priorities for this year. We are currently hiring for the replacement for Linda Bracamonte, who's usually responsible for developing those work plans. We have Kelly Garver and Brett Braidman are filling in, but we're basically continuing status quo, and the opportunity will be for whoever gets hired into Linda's place to develop the work plan for next year. For the NPDES program, which is the state-implemented federal program to regulate point source discharges to waters of the United States under delegated authority from US EPA, the program priorities are as follows. Ammonia, the 2013 US EPA criteria may not reflect Central Valley conditions. They developed a nationwide criteria. It includes some species that are not present in California waters. So the Central Valley Water Board is engaged with a number of its stakeholders to develop alternatives where alternatives are appropriate. It's a process that has a lot of exciting technical work going on, probably beyond the scope of this presentation, but one of the program priorities for the NPDES program. Toxicity is also on the agenda. The state board is changing their toxicity policy, which is a really big deal at the state board. It will incur costs on our dischargers. It will have our program staff issue their permits differently. So one of the priority programs or priority projects is to track that and figure out what impact that's going to have on our programs. Constituents of emerging concerns are another priority. That's working with the publicly owned treatment works and the MS4 to develop and implement statewide CEC pilot study monitoring plan, which first goes into looking at CECs, constituents of emerging concerns, in ambient water, and then switches to a focus on those constituents in effluent. And lastly, and you'll see this occur time and time again in these priorities, incorporate CV salts into the permits. Our WDR program, regulating discharges to groundwater and non-NPDES surface water discharges. The big 3 this year, to embark on the development of new general orders, a general order for domestic publicly owned treatment works, a general order for nut and seed dryers, and a general order for cold food processors. When you get a general order established, you increase consistency and you streamline the permit approval or modification process. GeoTracker is a fascinating database. You may be familiar with it. It houses a tremendous amount of environmental and technical data on site-specific locations. The Los Angeles Regional Board piloted a project where their WDR program ingested their data into GeoTracker. It gives the public a much readily available tool to look at monitoring reports, technical reports related to facilities. That's being rolled out statewide, so our WDR program is going to start working on that within our region. And again, CV salts, add the terms to the waste discharge requirements. Water quality certifications. The big focus this year will be on a timely issuance of certifications. I will say that the water quality certification program does a heck of a lot of work. A lot of that work the board does not see. because unlike waste discharge requirements, unlike NPDES permits, water quality certifications do not have to be adopted in a hearing before the board. So we've got a lot of units, a lot of staff working on making sure that the water quality certifications are appropriately protective of water quality. They set their goals very high. Review 95% of applications within 30 days and issue 95% of water quality certification within 60 days.
For context, this is the 401 program, right?
Yes.
And this is such things as dredging and what else?
Dredge and fill operations, compensatory wetlands for associated with development projects. A lot of and that's the bulk of their work, but a lot of workload goes into that. Caltrans is a huge share of the workload in the 401 certification. AB 1282 is a law that basically required regions 1, 5, and 9 to work with Caltrans and the Transportation Authority in California to streamline certain projects. I think that was done in anticipation of SB 1, which is the gas tax that will be diverted to pay for a lot of transportation projects throughout the state. A lot of that burden will fall on the water quality certification program to review the project proposals as they come in, make sure that they're adequately protective of water quality, and get them out the door so that the projects can be built. And lastly, the Water Quality Certification Unit works a lot with habitat conservation plans. So there's major work ongoing in South Sacramento, Butte County, and Placer County. The work on these habitat conservation plans identifies areas for development, plans for avoidance, minimization, and mitigation of wetland and species impacts. And it's the wetland impacts that the 401 unit is particularly focused on. Stormwater. And the three main areas of our stormwater program are the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Program, the MS4. For that project, for that program, we've got a few permits that we're looking at. The region-wide MS4 permit that this board adopted is a specific program to the Central Valley. It is a general order that covers most of the MS4 discharges for the Phase 1 permittees in our region. And there's a lot of work products, a lot of reports that are being turned in by the permittees that the MS4 unit looks at very closely. The Phase 2, which is a different subset of MS4 permittees, also has a general order. That general order is issued by the state board. There's also a heck of a lot of deliverables coming into the regional board this year. And lastly, the MS4 systems are at the forefront of the state trash policy implementation. These contain work plans that discuss how the municipalities will be dealing with trash, whether they are installing full capture systems, whether they are exploring other regulatory alternatives. The state board issued the trash policy. Regional board is charged with reviewing the plans to implement the trash policy. It's going to be a big workload in the year to come. Construction and Caltrans are another wing of the stormwater unit. That unit is pledging to implement permit processing improvements and a target of 385 construction stormwater field inspections. Our stormwater units, just for your reference, the stormwater permits are primarily issued by a state board. So construction permit is a statewide order, industrial permit is a statewide order. So a lot of our staff are focused on the implementation of those statewide orders. They don't write the permits themselves. They are the boots on the ground, doing the inspections and making sure that there's permit compliance.
Just out of curiosity, do we have involvement with the construction for the high-speed rail?
You bet. You bet. It's a significant component of our workload. There are certain streamlining aspects to that. There are certain projects that are being managed on the state level as well. But Clay could probably talk to it a little bit more. But there's and Adam as well. Whenever there's construction going on, there's going to be either a state board or regional board presence doing the monitoring and making sure that the erosion and sediment control is being appropriately done at those sites. Industrial, the industrial general permit is a pretty tough permit. The main target for this program is the 195 stormwater field inspections to make sure that the industrial permit is being complied with. Basin planning, TMDL programs. Big stuff on the horizon for 2019-2020 fiscal year. The 2020 integrated report, and again, this is a Clean Water Act mandated report. It requires the state board, and through the state board, all the regional boards, to identify those water bodies that do not meet water quality standards. We are in the process of developing an integrated report. Basically, that means that it satisfied several elements of the Clean Water Act, and basically charts the process on those water bodies that are not living up to standards. That list keeps growing. A lot of the reason why that list keeps growing is because we keep doing additional monitoring and finding problems within our waterways. It's not necessarily a reflection that water quality trends are going downwards. I think in many respects they are getting better. But as we continue to look with a more finer and finer mesh at all the water quality issues within our region, we discover more issues. And so looking at all those lines of scientific evidence and compiling that in a region-wide report is a huge undertaking, and that undertaking is beginning right now, but will certainly ramp up in 2019-2020. Basin planning TMDL programs will continue working with mercury, pesticides, and other impairment TMDLs, and they will also work with the Delta Strategic Plan, the projects that will improve water quality in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta, the Delta Nutrient Research Plan, and the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. Currently, we're also looking at and you just approved the triennial review. When those work plans get more developed, we'll be prioritizing those rank 3 projects and figuring out which ones we're going to tackle in the upcoming year. CV salts. Main hurdle, get the amendments through the State Water Board, US EPA, and the Office of Administrative Law. That is the bulk of the work being done in the CV salts program right now. As to program implementation, Ann Littlejohn and her staff are working with all the different program areas that will need to implement CV salts. So she's talking with the 401 NPDS, waste discharge requirements, dairy programs, et cetera, irrigated lands, to figure out how they're going to implement CV salts. Ann's unit is also conducting and plans to conduct quite a bit of stakeholder coordination in fiscal year 2019-2020 and manage a contract. And there's a contract between the State Water Board and the Kings River Watershed Coalition Authority, essentially to scope out what it means to comply with CV salts. How do we develop a management zone? That's a contract that we have to have a very close eye on to make sure it meets the objectives articulated by this board. Non-point source program. The goal of the non-point source program is to restore waters impacted by non-point source pollution and to protect unimpaired water bodies by assessing problem sources and implementing management programs. Here, we actually, this is what Jennifer LeBay does during her normal job, her non-triennial review recruitment job. A lot of it is grant management. There's a 319H grant and Timber Fund grant monies that are devoted to projects like studying nutrients in Clear Lake, working on selenium in the San Joaquin River mud slough and grasslands, and analyzing chlorpyrifos and diazinon in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta, the Sacramento and Feather Rivers, and in the Delta itself. The non-point source program is also heavily involved in identifying research needs and practices to reduce cyanohab frequency and extent. There are 2 pilot projects going on right now in Lake Britton and Clear Lake under the non-point source program. Swamp. The Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, again, a program that Ann Littlejohn works with. These are all projects that they have ongoing, so where we're devoting resources to doing water quality work. Monitoring the Delta, so support statewide contract that provides toxicity lab services. There's $200K going to the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. The Lower American River, the E. coli study that is coordinated through the SWAMP program. Post-fire monitoring in Carr and in the Mendocino complex. SWAMP funds and SWAMP staff are being dedicated to try and support those efforts. There are monies going to a watershed-based plan for Battle Creek to the tune of about $60,000 per year to fund stream gauges and other types of monitoring. There's also a study underway to develop reference conditions in foothill streams, basically look at baseline ecology, baseline water quality ecology. It is an effort with the Lahontan Water Board and the State Board to establish non-perennial stream monitoring and focused in the Sierra Nevada foothills. And lastly, just about everybody in the SWAMP program is recruited to be a data expert, whether they like it or not. They work in data management quite a bit, managing all the data that the board ingests. They are working to improve the submittal process of the ambient surface water quality data to the California Environmental Data Exchange Network, which, again, you have to abide by certain protocols to ingest the data into that system. Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Main things that are happening, I think you got a flavor of that this morning. The East San Joaquin Precedential Order, implementing those requirements, whether it's drinking water monitoring, surface water expert panel, or the development of multiple templates. That work will continue into fiscal year 2019-2020. We are going to be prioritizing groundwater protection elements of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program in the year to come. We're going to continue to monitor constituents of concern and address problems where they're found with management plans. And lastly, once again, CV salts. We're planning on incorporating the strategies of CV salts into the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program permits once CV salts is finalized. Forest Activities Program. I think this was the longest sheet that was submitted to me was the Forest Activities Program. We had to whittle it down just a little bit. They've got their hands in a lot of projects. Chief among them, AB 1492 reporting process. That's the one that basically put a mill tax on timber projects to fund additional timber work in the state. They are also developing CalTrees, which is the California Timber Regulation and Environmental Evaluation System. It's an online system to streamline the submission and review for timber harvest plans and timber harvest documents.
I have to hand it to people who make up acronyms like that. CV salts is another one.
I know that there's somebody very clever came up with that one. Also, the Forest Activities Program is engaged with an effort with the Lahontan Water Board to develop a joint permit for federal forest lands, especially those lands that span Region 5 and Region 6, with the idea being we want consistent approaches in both of those regions. The Board of Forestry will be engaged in a large rulemaking process, and so it's a priority for us to follow that. That a lot of that work is going to be done to implement SB 901, which I discussed a little earlier today, which has the small timber harvest exceptions and the power transmission line. New regulations have to be developed for that. And lastly, we've got the Board of Forestry Effectiveness Monitoring Committee, basically to look at the forest practice rules, how they're implemented, and make sure that we have effective monitoring to address the potential water quality impacts from those programs. I'd add to this, there's a lot of post-fire work being done by the Forest Activities Program. They're also heavily engaged in the Battle Creek watershed-based plan that I mentioned under the Non-Point Source Program, and there's a huge enforcement component to the Forest Activities Program as well. The Oil Field Program. California is still the third largest oil-producing state in the U.S., and nearly all that production occurs in the Central Valley. For the oil field program, the priorities for this upcoming year, enrolling dischargers, especially those currently operating under cleanup and abatement orders, under one of the 3 general orders that the board adopted, I believe it was in 2017, and we began implementing last year. Pond closures, there's a lot of operators within the Central Valley that opted, rather than comply with the new regulations, to close their ponds. It's not easy to close a pond. You just don't turn off the spigot. You have to make sure that there's a lot of the closure protocols are followed to effectively stop infiltration of new water and limit any degradation that is caused by that non-operating pond. So the oil field program looks at those ponds, even the closed ones, to make sure that they're closed appropriately and don't present a big threat to water quality.
One quick question. I'm curious, how many pond closures are we talking about?
Clay, do you have that off the top of your head?
I think it's something like in the order right now, about 30, 40 facilities. I mean, it is a significant portion. There's a lot more ponds than just that.
You could, yeah, 30 to 40 facilities. Some of those facilities have dozens of ponds. So they range in, they range inside. You have like little polishing ponds. You have huge disposal ponds. So, you know, I saw the pond list recently, printed in kind of microfiche size font. It spans still about 20 pages. So you've got a heck of a lot of ponds out there. A lot of them are closing. And I think that reflects a lot of the work being done under SB4 to take a close look at how we permit these things. And a lot of folks are opting to inject that wastewater as opposed to disposing of it in a way that could impact usable groundwater. So that's a good thing. The oil field program is also continuing its work on the Food Safety Expert Panel, which plans to develop a white paper. Staff-led will lead in that. And that white paper will describe the environmental effects of the irrigation of crops for human consumption with oil field produced water. It's a highly controversial issue. I think the way the panel is going right now is trying to develop the threshold under which this program is appropriate, because there's a heck of a lot of very, very high quality water that can be effectively used in this way. It's for all intents and purposes a new source of water in a very water starved area. And lastly, again, it's a huge workload represented by just a few lines in this plan, but the UIC, underground injection control, and well stimulation review of the projects that go to the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources under the Department of Conservation, DOGGR, and the State Water Board consumes a heck of a lot of staff time to make sure that those projects will not impact aquifers through the injection or stimulation activities. Going into the land disposal program, again, these are surface impoundments, landfills, and a lot of composting as well. The land disposal program plans on revising high priority waste discharge requirements. The way that it's proposing to prioritize its revisions is based on threat and complexity of the wastes that are discharged at those facilities, compliance and enforcement issues that may pop up at those facilities, and they also plan on revising waste discharge requirements for sites that lack adequate financial assurances. And Title 27 mandates financial assurances for closure and post-closure activities when you have a situation where the landfill, you can't have an operator walk away and leave a landfill. There has to be a financial mechanism so that the state can intervene, close that landfill using a contractor. Those funds have to be set aside if you're going to operate a landfill. The land disposal program works a lot with a statewide compost general order. There's an enforcement effort that is still underway to enroll those few remaining green waste and food waste composting facilities that are not regulated under the general order. They had to bring those into the fold as well. And lastly, the state board, CalRecycle, are working on an update to the Title 27 regulations that govern these facilities. There's a significant component of staff time that will go towards tracking that regulatory process.
Where is the line between us and Cal Recycle on composting?
It's a blurry one. I think that with that Title 27 regulations, and Andrew, you might be able to speak to it a little bit more. But speaking from the legal aspect, it's one of those areas where those are joint regulations, prepared by both the State Water Board and Cal Recycle. They both have a hand in developing those regulations. The regulations are very hand in glove in terms of how they work. Cal Recycle tends to be in the sorting and the regulation of the siting of the facilities, and we tend to regulate the liners, the runoff, and the threat to groundwater quality.
So as far as administrating those regulations, though, are we responsible, or the state board responsible for the water quality side?
A little bit of both. I think when we see a composting operation go sideways, it falls squarely within the regional board's purview to address that. The state general, it's a lot like the stormwater programs with that respect. State issues their order, we enroll the facilities, and when something goes south, it's an ACL in front of this board. Moving forward to confined animals, there's a lot going on with the confined animals program. We plan on revising the 2013 Dairy General Order. I think it was alluded to in a separate discussion that there is an extensive summary report coming in for the dairy program this April that will inform what the next generation of the Dairy General Order is going to look like. We are also planning on amending the poultry order to essentially either extract pasture poultry operations or to create a separate tier for pasture poultry operations. As we developed the poultry general order, as we started implementing it, we found that pasture poultry operations operate on a very different threat to water quality than the more confined units. So it's appropriate to regulate them a little differently. So that's a modification to our order that we learned through experience. Also, this confined animals unit, a lot of their work goes into inspections and in particular with respect to all facilities, and general order enrollments with respect to the poultry and bovine general orders. Those are new orders, and so there's a lot of effort making sure that they're enrolled in those general orders. With respect to digesters, there's a CDFA plans on spending about another $70.5 million on 40 dairy digesters. Some of that money has already been spent, but on 40 dairy digesters, there's another $21.6 million to fund alternative manure management technologies. That is something that our staff are highly engaged in, trying to figure out what's the most effective way to regulate dairy waste so that it doesn't impact water quality. And lastly, as with other programs, incorporate TV salts language into the permits. The mines program, a lot of ambitious projects being undertaken by the mines program. Chief among them, and I think very important, is the Abandoned Mines Charter. It's basically a strategy for management plans for abandoned mine discharges. The shocking number that we keep seeing thrown around is 46,000 abandoned mine features in the state of California. That's just a staggering number. Recognizing that even if only a small percentage of those pose a significant threat to water quality, we're talking about a lot of facilities with very little resources to rectify those problems. The Abandoned Mine Charter will basically lay out the regional board's strategy for dealing with those mines, and will also help point out where the resource needs need to go.
If I'm not mistaken, the flow out of Iron Mountain is at least an order of magnitude higher than any other mine on this list here. Could be wrong on that, but I know it's pretty darn high flow, particularly after any kind of a rainfall.
That's about right.
And there's a fund, but I understand that fund has a finite life to it.
Yes.
And what is it, around 20 years now, or maybe a little less?
20, 30 years, yeah. It's for what it's worth, it's AIG manages a fund as part of a multi-agency litigation and settlement through the US EPA Superfund laws. There was a fund set up to construct work on Iron Mountain Mine and to fund a remediation system. And there's two things going on. One, that fund is slowly going downwards. It's got some years left on it. 20, 30 years seems like a long time, but when you figure that this thing is going to take 1,000 years or more to rectify, it starts to look fairly
Yeah, I
inadequate.
started working on Iron Mountain Mine, the issues we were having with EPA and over 20 years ago. That time goes quickly. So we're looking at Iron Mountain some back then, 20 years ago or more, and took a scientist up from Lawrence Berkeley, none other than Dr. Stringfellow. And there was interest at that time in developing a biological process that could actually remine. And the idea is develop a process that can at least partially pay for the operation itself. There's been a lot of progression in technology over time, and given that it's not that far off, quite frankly speaking, I think that we need to be looking at an alternate technology on Iron Mountain Mine.
No, I absolutely agree. I will say that those, and we can brief you separately on this, but those efforts are underway. They haven't borne fruit, but as recently as about 1.5 years ago, we were contacted for additional project support in that respect. I don't know if they can make it pan out just yet. Commodity prices being such as they are, the stuff that you pull out of there is stuff that you can pull out, much cheaper in China still, and so that tends to be
That's
a
right,
big
and
driver.
I don't think it's going to pay for the process, but what you're looking at is offset costs.
Yeah, and I think as of the current date, it still costs more to run the process than the offset would be.
Yeah. But I imagine, and I could be wrong, you're talking about a chemical physical process, and what I'm talking about is a biological process
Yeah, I think
where you tend to get better economics in that.
I think last time we were discussing there was a biological component that was being discussed. The problem is some of that biology gets hot, and you have to dispose of it in a hazardous waste facility. And once you get to that point, the cost goes upside down. But again, we'll continue to explore those opportunities, and if you'd like a workshop on that, we can certainly have a workshop on
Don't
that.
need a workshop. Maybe a workshop. You got so many other things that we really need to talk about. But it's something maybe I'd like to follow up on because actually we have Dr. Stringfellow under contract.
Yeah.
Not Stringfellow. Stringfellow,
Stringfellow,
okay.
yeah.
Like the mine.
Just a little more background on that is when that decision was made, we were rather fortunate to have a deep pocket French pharmaceutical company, I believe.
That's right.
And there was a contract to build those facilities and operate them for a period of time. And I think that was CH2M Hill for 20 years or 30 years.
I believe so. Yeah.
And the hope was that they would develop other technologies, like you said, that they could, recover some of that cost. So it's, and then there was another fund that was put of like a significant amount of money, it was $50 or $500 million, I don't know what it was. And that was invested, and the hope was that the income off of that invested fund would offset ongoing treatment costs beyond CH2M Hill. So it was a very good plan, and I think it went awry in the recession probably when the earning power of investments dropped so significantly.
I think that's part of the story. Yeah, and I think it's AIG that manages those funds. They've come to us over the years and tried to figure out ways to extend the life of that. You know, for those of you that might not know, you know, Iron Mountain Mine, the treatment technology is huge and it looks really complicated, but it's basically, you know, chemistry 101. It's nothing more complicated than dropping some limestone in there and,
Yeah.
and trickling it out and then piling the rest of the stuff at the brick flat landfill that's at the top of the hill.
And we're running out of space in that.
And we're running out of space there too. That's I got more than a few headaches with that particular project.
Well, let's, if possible, raise that insofar as not a big effort now, but looking at possibilities, seeing if we can develop some new direction.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We'll flag that one. Cannabis program, again, formed in 2014.
Hey, before you leave that,
Uh-oh.
are they still shooting at Walker Mine?
He's still shooting at one. No, I don't believe so. I think some of the
No, Dr. Longley, we've gotten that sorted out with the current owner, and things are in a reasonably good situation right now.
I'm glad that tour got canceled because we might have been shot when we went up there. I'd still like to go up there again.
Okay.
Keep that in mind, please.
We'll definitely make sure that there's no shooting when we take the board chair. Heading through the cannabis program, these are the top four. There's a number of others, but the top four: expand the program south. The regional board is proposing to increase its presence in the southern portion of the region. We are going to continue working on the Cannabis Identification and Prioritization System, or CIPS. We got some funds to further develop that. It's a pretty innovative GIS-based system that helps identify and map cannabis cultivation sites and basically assess the risks posed by these sites. It involves some pretty cool technology, pretty cool satellite imaging and analysis of the reflectivity of the particular cannabis canopy so that you can map that out fairly well. It's a truly innovative program, and when you have tens of thousands of these sites and you need to figure out which ones you're going to go after, we need a tool like that in our tool belt. We're also thinking of trying to develop a coalition-style third-party program similar to what we have in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Nobody has stepped up from the cannabis industry to take on that mantle just yet, but conversations are ongoing. And lastly, there's the regional to state board order transition. Regional order has been or will be rescinded this summer. And all of our regional order enrollees will need to either transfer to the state board's general order or terminate coverage. We were one of the pioneers in this field. We adopted our general order before the state board did. They adopted a general order that's trickier to follow, but that supersedes our order, and we'll be winding down our order this summer. Also, continued enforcement, continued coordination, including with the California National Guard, are components that are priorities with the cannabis program. Compliance and enforcement. And again, this is not to say this is all that compliance enforcement is doing. They do a tremendous amount of work. But the two kind of interesting and innovative priority projects that are going on this year is really the development of business rules to consistently track enforcement through databases such as the California Integrated Water Quality System, or CWIX. That's where a lot of our NPDES data is housed. The California Stormwater Multiple Applications and Report Tracking System, or SMARTS, and GeoTracker. So those three databases house a lot of our compliance information, effectively tracking what the compliance and enforcement unit is doing across those three databases is challenging at best. And so the compliance and enforcement unit is taking this on and working to develop business rules to clarify that and to produce more meaningful reports to the regional board. And lastly, CV Salts, also popping up on the compliance and enforcement radar. They propose making a priority to develop a strategy to issue, track, and enforce the required milestones under CV Salts, whether this is a notice of intent or the deadlines under a management zone. Site cleanup program. 123 TCP is an issue that the site cleanup program has been very much involved in. They've got databases and are working on developing maps to analyze the impacts of 123 TCP throughout the region. They are also working on various GIS tools to identify sources of contamination, particularly at cleanup sites, and working on understanding the threat posed by emerging constituents, whether that's hexachrome, the polyfluoroalkyl chemicals, or PFCs. And a lot of those constituents are showing up throughout the valley. We have to understand where they come from, what the sources are, and what we can do about it. The Site Cleanup Subaccount Program is a fairly brand new program at the State Board. There's a lot of resources there that could potentially be devoted to closing out these long-standing regulatory problems that we've got in the Site Cleanup Program. Some of the key sites that they'll be focusing on fiscal year 2019-2020 include the Aerojet site right here in Rancho Cordova, McClellan Air Force Base, which has taken pretty dramatic steps forward in returning that federal facility to private hands and have that land be beneficially reused. Sacramento Rail Yards, which is often referred to as the largest brownfield infill site west of the Mississippi, and then various brownfield projects throughout the Central Valley. And last but not least, the UST program. UST program, their case closure review is truly extraordinary. When you see that the priority is to evaluate whether each and every case meets the requirements of the State Board's low-threat UST case closure policy. That's their goal. That's what they continuously do. They keep looking at these UST sites, keep assessing whether they're moving in the right direction. It's a tremendous workload, again, one that is not always reflected in the board meetings because a lot of that work is going on behind the scene. This UST program is also taking a close eye towards case prioritization. We've got a huge caseload. Which cases they really work on to drive towards closure is something that they face as a continual challenge. Some of the biggest metrics that they use are really whether the threat poses a threat to, or whether the site poses a threat to drinking water. So looking at those sites, not spreading out their resources evenly across every UST site, but really cranking the screws down on those that can pose a serious threat to human health are ones that's one of their priorities for fiscal year 2019-2020. Prompt responses are incredibly important. So they have a goal of responding to all correspondences within 60 days, and this isn't just picking up the telephone and calling somebody back. This is responding to often lengthy technical reports about site status, analyzing those, and getting back to the consultants that prepared those promptly is a real good way of making sure a case moves forward. If the regulatory agency is silent when a report is turned in, when a cleanup report is turned in, that's a good way to lose effective momentum on a case. The owners of the site don't see the reason to throw more money at it, and frankly, a lot of good progress can stall, and very often the work needs to be repeated, which is the last thing we want to have happen. And lastly, I think consistent with the above goals, the UST program says basically they're going to ensure regular contact. Many of the stalled cases, including a lot of them that we get from the counties, show that directives have not been sent to the responsible parties in years. When I worked with the UST program as an attorney, it was often the program staff had just inherited a case from a county local oversight program, and letters hadn't been sent in years, so we had to look and track down responsible parties, make sure the addresses were still correct, that their legal representatives hadn't changed. So board staff are taking it upon themselves to rectify these gaps in communication by really making sure that they have regular contact with the parties. If you're under the gun, if you need to get a site cleaned up, you should know about it. You should know about it regularly from regional board directives. And with that, that concludes the presentation talking about program priorities, and I'd be more than happy to field any questions that you might have or entertain any discussion.
That was an exhausting presentation. just looking at the workload.
I have a question. This is in regard, of course, my passion is disadvantaged communities. And I raise the question because I'm looking at all the program activities here, and as you made mention of the mines a while ago, there are 46,000 mines, you can't do everything with them. I'm mindful of the fact that many of the disadvantaged communities may be in some ways in some of the priority items, but just bearing in mind the situation of disadvantaged communities, a lot of it could be from the farmland, a lot of it could be problems from the discharges, a lot of it could be from just not having operable septic systems. They're nowhere recognized here in any of this. So my thought is that, you know, take a look at it, give some consideration to it, because in many instances, where they are addressed in some of the programs that are already identified, there's some success stories, and they should be pointed out. But then where there are areas where no one is listening until finally Community Water Center or someone gets the word that there's a problem, and then they are out there to address it. We already have information from our state water board for Division of Drinking Water, and all of them have a sense of those disadvantaged communities and the issues, but in our Central Valley and our issues, they're very prevalent. What can we do to be able to put this in and make it a focus?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm
No-
just throwing it out as a concern, and that I think it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, it's integral to nearly all, if not all, of the water quality programs that we've got in front of you. That's how, for example, the site cleanup program, that's how they prioritize their cases. That's how the UST program prioritizes its cases. That's where the irrigated lands program is devoting the lion's share of its resources. The WDR program, when they're talking about incorporating CV salts language, a lot of that effort is going to be focused on the areas where they have disadvantaged communities that are impacted, particularly by nitrates. But it's a good point. You know, I think I inherited some of this process. There was not consideration really given to how these components interacted with disadvantaged communities. And if you like, in years to come, we can have a summary of where these folks go, you know, of how each one of these program areas touches disadvantaged communities and prioritizes its projects. I think when we review the annual work plans, and again, I'm still coming into the back end of this cycle, the question often is, well, you know, how is the human right to water incorporated into your annual work plan? And I think it's reflected in the priorities, but it's not called out specifically, and it should be. So I appreciate that feedback.
I think that's a really important point that you make, as these are all looking at the programs we're doing, and we're not looking at, you know, what disadvantaged communities, which programs are they affected by or most concerned about, or the homeless populations or rural communities, and there must be a number of different targets that the one we heard about today is tribal communities. Which of these programs impact on tribal communities? And we know a lot just because we have NPDES permits. Those are mostly urban communities, but you know, there's different Venn diagrams that probably could be. But some of those might. I was thinking about that. I can explain that a little bit. And for just me, I was just noting here. I think when I probably started, I think there were about 8 of these programs that we worked on, and now I think we're seeing 18 listed here. So it's indicative of the increased complexity, and I'm sure that's why our workforce has doubled. It hasn't really done that. I don't think it's changed since I got here.
You're right. You came on the end of 90s, I should say, and using 2000 as a reference point. I think we had prior to that about 30% of the programs we have now. It started back in 98 with the sunsetting of the waiver programs, and took some time before we started getting the irrigated lands program, which was the first big one of those. Bob was instrumental in that, but it's just grown since then. cannabis.
And I want to say it hasn't grown for the sake of growing. I mean, I
No,
think
it's
that
water quality issues.
this region and board is doing a
Right.
much more thorough job. I think the staff is much more effective and efficient in their work and achieving our goal of water quality. So I think all of this represents a substantive jump up in ability to do our job, so.
And I put this slide up here because I think I appreciate that feedback. I want to pledge to you, to the board, since we've got quorum here and we can discuss this. In the end of the year assessment, we'll give you a report on how these programs are affecting disadvantaged communities. And this time next year, when I'm presenting the next annual work plan priority approval, we'll talk about that as well.
I appreciate that, and as I said before, I think it's important because there are some success stories in
Absolutely.
it, and they need
Yeah.
to be called out, and then those areas where they need to be taken on, but there's nowhere you can connect the two. And
Yeah.
I appreciate all the work that staff is doing. I'm not encouraging you to do more work, but tag the DAC when you're doing your work out there, because I think you can add it up and show some significant
Yeah.
improvements in progress next year.
No, I think that is an excellent lens by which, I mean, I value your perspective here. I think, that's consistent with what we were talking about this morning in the case of how do we get the message out about what we're doing here. I think that's a critical component.
Hard copy wasn't given to us.
Patrick, I was
Yeah.
curious about one other program you mentioned,
Absolutely.
which was SCAP.
Yeah.
I noticed a lot of the sites that were listed as the sample sites have been in the regulatory program for ages. So what is SCAP? What's the benefit
What
of
is
that program?
SCAP? Yeah, so the site cleanup, basically it's called the SCAP, or the sub-account. It is basically a lot of money that has been generated by the renewal of the UST program and the UST kind of mill tax funding. There is an opportunity, and it's quite a large amount of money. I mean, I think we're talking I know we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars statewide that we can invest in cleanup programs. And I can walk you through, there's a lot of opportunities for sites where there's orphan sites or there's not a viable, responsible party. Sites proposed for redevelopment, sites that are impacting drinking water supplies are kind of at the top of the list, can qualify for funding through that new program. I mean, and so that's, it's, I forget what FAST stands for. It's FAAST. If you have the misfortune of owning a site and you don't have any money to clean that thing up, there's several funding programs. SCAP, I think, at this stage is probably the most flexible of those programs. So if you've got a contamination site, you can't pay for it. There's no viable, responsible party out there. Or if you're, a city or a municipality proposing a project, I think that's kind of where you go to try and get a grant funding or get some type of matching funds to do some good work in that area.
It's not a very good acronym. It stands, no, it stands for Site Cleanup Sub-Account Program.
Yep.
And there's a web page, State Board on it.
The sub is silent, I suppose.
There's another category here, I think it's in and amongst a lot of these other programs, is grant funding programs that
Yep.
we do. And I think about like just our work with the Rose Foundation as an example.
Yep.
Which is, as far as I know, continues to be an excellent, effective use of funds. But I don't know what, there's an assemblage or just a note of what is the summation of the grant program we're doing.
Yeah. So to a certain extent, the way that it's called out in this process is where we're administering the grant. So a lot of that happens in the 319H Timber Fund program. We certainly work with DAS, the Division of Administrative Services downtown, and DFA, the Division of Financial Assistance, who frankly have vast sums of money that they're very good at getting out the door. So I think it's kind of missing in this as a priority, because usually it's not us pulling the trigger on it. But I think there's a lot of times where we guide folks, and the Rose Foundation is gotten quite adept at that. We guide folks through the state board process, and we help them out, and we help them figure out what resources are available. It's kind of, when we talk about the priority projects, I think a lot of the units view that as kind of their core work. But it can be a very significant part of their workload if you're trying to handhold and shepherd somebody through the state board finance process. You have, like I said, you have entities, self-help. Some of the municipalities, Rose Foundation, they're quite adept at doing that. Other folks, gotta work on that.
We talked, the ranch fire, that our board got $600,000 for erosion control, and we're just talking about the car fire, and so those are peripheral, I think, but again, they are an important element. It's dispersed.
Yeah, and to be honest, that was there was no rule book for that one. It was pretty wild. Speaking personally, I was a little embarrassed at how little of a playbook there was about what funds could or could not be deployed, whether they were federal or state funds. I got to give a lot of credit to Clint, to Joe Karkowski, and some of the allies that we had working on this project at the state board, and frankly Eileen too, who said, we're going to get this done. We're going to figure out how to get the money out the door, and we're going to call the right federal partners to say this has to happen. But we're working on taking some of those lessons learned back. It wasn't a priority for fiscal year 18-19, but it sure as heck became a priority, and it's something we worked on when that happened.
And I look at this as the board responsibility in terms of our oversight of public funds. And,
Oh, yeah.
And even when we have money going through the organization in various forms, it's like, I can pick up some of it in a lot of different places, but I don't have oversight that this money is going here and this is the result, and so I don't know if I recall a summation sort of accounting for each year or something. And I'm not trying to make more work again, but we're talking about how to organize this stuff.
So I hesitate to mention this, but the State Water Board is in the process of completely redoing its fiscal accounting systems. Every state agency is completely and utterly redoing its financial systems. You may have seen it at advertisements on bus terminals. Fiscal, with the S as a dollar sign, is the new state accounting system, and it applies to everybody. Holy smokes, is it a train wreck in terms of getting effective accounting reports out. So we're a little light on some of the budget reports because this huge new database that the state has spent a lot of money on is not outputting anything to us. We're working really hard, and I think that there's some staff at State Board that are kind of keeping tabs on some aspects of it, but the ability to generate those kind of reports at the push of a button, which is really what this system is kind of supposed to do, it's probably about a year and a half out. Again, to be quite honest, there are very smart people that are typing in numbers one by one because it can't ingest the data the way it's supposed to. So again, don't want to air too much of the state's dirty laundry out there, but in terms of the financial reporting, that's one of the reasons why some of the reports recently have been a little lighter.
It's already made the newspapers. There's been discussion.
Oh, yeah.
And numbers on the amount of dollars that have been spent, which are quite high.
Absolutely. But again, if there's no more questions, I think I've certainly heard some good discussion here. We're fine to close. At your pleasure.
Thank you. So, no more questions, no more presentations, so we're done with 16. So, I understand that there is going to be a holiday party next door at 5 o'clock, and that we will be back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
It's,
8:30?
yeah.
8:30?
It's a holiday party. Don't we get till 9?
Great. So
8:30 tomorrow.
we will recess until 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you.